Well, thank you. So I guess we should start with the loving CMC part. I was talking to people at my table about why they came to CMC. And get a bunch of answers, right? They want a great liberal arts education. They want to learn how to learn. I think this one said it was the best school he got into. So for me, it was all of those reasons. But when I arrived in CMC in 1979, I know some of you weren't born, it was pretty clear all of my classmates were very smart and they wanted to learn. So college wasn't really that easy. And by 1983, I was really excited because now I was going to go out and join the real world. And I figured the average business person wouldn't be as smart as my classmates at CMC. I wouldn't be graded on the same curve. And, life would be easy. Then just before graduation, one of my professors came and he said to me, "Jonathan, the best way to keep learning after you leave school is to surround yourself with the smartest people you can find." Well, this was anathema to my plan of taking life easy and kicking the crap out of the stupid people in the business world. So, fortunately, for that one brief moment, and just that one moment in 1983, I decided to actually internalize some advice and listen to a professor. Jerry, it wasn't you. So after business school, I went to where I thought the smartest people in the world would be. Where was that? Not Manhattan. For those of you who have been coming to my talks for the last few years, you know how much I love to bash bankers. Well, it's 2010. Jonathan's banker bashing is finally in vogue. I didn't go to Wall Street. I went to Silicon Valley. And how did it work out? Turned out my professor was somewhat omniscient. I ended up with some really smart people. In fact, early in my career, I went to see Steve Jobs speak. And what happened? My reaction was pretty predictable. Yikes, I'll never be that good. I'm not that smart. So I thought about my professor's advice, and I said, I should go to work for Apple. And I did. A few years later, I met a guy by the name of Milo Medin. And he was articulating that you could take the IEEE 802.14 spec and Ethernet and make the internet work really fast over cable modems. And he sketched it all out on a whiteboard for me. What was my reaction? Not that smart. Maybe I should go to work for At Home. So I did. Then I met Larry Page and Sergey Brin in 1998. And Larry said, search will be the most monetizable moment on the internet. And they said a bunch of other clever things, like, in 10 years we can digitize all of humanity's knowledge. What was my reaction to Larry and Sergey? Not that smart. Should go to work for Google. So I did. So there's fortunately an important difference between CMC and the real world. When I was here, I had to compete with the smart people. In the real world, you don't have to compete with Steve Jobs and Milo Medin and Larry Page and Sergey Brin. You don't have to beat them, you can join them. I think that realization alone can guarantee success. Just find the smartest people, hook in, and hang on. But as a product of a liberal arts education, what's the primary thing we learn? And what did my professor, Leon Hollerman, hope for me beyond just financial success? I think he wanted me to keep learning and observing and learning from my observations, which are the tools in the chest of the traditional liberal arts graduate. So while Leon was smart, even he knew he wasn't so smart that he could predict the future. In fact, the course I took from him was called The Cultural Underpinnings of the Japanese Economic Miracle. It was the early 1980s. Japan seemed on the verge of world domination. Didn't happen. But the course taught me how culture directly affects success in countries and in companies. So even though the whole premise of the course, it turned out, was completely wrong on the surface, the course was invaluable in my career. It taught me that what matters is educating your mind to make your own observations. And that's the skill that I think that we learn here at CMC. So here's my career advice for you as future graduates. It's my entire best-selling business book, which I've not yet published. Find the smartest people you can, join them, observe them, learn from them, take what you can learn, and help them, And this is something that you are all uniquely qualified to do. As I've taken that view and these rules, I've been lucky enough to actually have this front row on the emergence of the internet and some of the most interesting companies of our time. The truth is, I never really wanted to emulate Steve Jobs. Well, maybe I did. Or Milo Medine or Larry Page. I wanted to emulate Alexis de Tocqueville, right? The 19th century French historian who came to America to write a paper, a treatise basically on the American penal system, and instead he wrote the definitive treatise on democracy in America. So what follows today are my observations on what makes people successful, gleaned from my front row seat to the last 25 years of change in Silicon Valley. I also hope that what you will see today is why you want to go back and study hard in every class that you're in. A history class, an English class, those are the ingredients that are going to make you a successful leader. The French guy who wrote Le Petit Prince, what's his name? Antoine, whatever, you know, the French guy, right? Well, the French, they sometimes say something clever. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. As CMCers, if you're really going to aspire to be leaders in the making, that's what's in that brochure that you guys produce, right? You want to leave longing for the endless immensity of the sea and apply the tools in your liberal arts chest to learn to make the best choices for yourself and for your ship. So here are this CMC's grads' observations and learnings, which I call Jonathan's Rules from the bestseller he has yet to write. Communication. 9 rules. Communication number 1. Over-communicate in all ways, all the time. There is no such thing as too much communication. When you think you've communicated something too much, you're probably just beginning to get through. You have to have all-hands meetings, send regular emails, run office hours, run off-sites, update your status on Facebook and Twitter. You can't communicate to people enough. There's a life corollary to this work rule. Over-communicating applies to everything we do, especially with your parents. They want to hear from you more often. My mother's over there. Communication rule number 2, openly share everything with your colleagues. This doesn't mean it's okay to cheat on tests. You again. What it means is that Google, our default mode is to share all information. We use Google Docs for everything. John's just learning. And when you create a new doc, the default mode is to share it. This is not an accident. It was a deliberate decision. And it's a remarkable thing in the business world. Most big companies, power accrues to those who hoard information. At Google, we strive to make everyone equally empowered from an information standpoint. In the internet age, power comes from sharing information, not hoarding it. You also have to trust your people and give them this information. They appreciate it when you trust them. Trust breeds loyalty. When you trust people, they repay you in kind. When you don't, they have other options. Communication rule number 3. Repetition does not spoil the prayer. Repetition does not spoil the prayer. Repetition does not spoil the prayer. When you say something so many times you are sick of it, that's about the time they are starting to hear it. I find it is about 20 times. I see a professor who's nodding. Communication rule number 4. Each word matters. Be crisp and direct, and choose each word wisely. Communication isn't rambling on in long-winded emails or spewing out every thought that comes into your head. Your words should be thoughtful and precise. Elmer Leonard, the author, was asked the secret of his success as a writer. He responded, I leave out the parts that people skip. See, that's why it's important to take the humanities courses. Give presentations whenever you can. Take classes where you have to write more. When you update your Facebook page, do it with flair. Understanding how to write well and effectively communicate the nuances of your thoughts is the most important thing you will learn in school. Remember Mark Twain's quote, I would have written a shorter letter if I'd had the time. Communication rule number 5. Great leaders are great teachers, and great teachers are great storytellers. Narrative is how we learn. How many of you remember the career story I told at the beginning of this about Steve Jobs and Milo Medina and smart people, right? You're all nodding. How many of you remember communication rule number 2? Openly sharing information. No one. You teach with stories. Your best professors, the one nodding, understand this intuitively. Think about their lectures. That's how you should teach. And if you want to be a leader, you will teach. The two are inseparable. Communication rule 6A. As leaders, you learn more by listening than by talking. Listening makes you more humble, more intuitive, and smarter. Talking does none of these things. It just enamors you with your own eloquence. When you listen, you learn how things work, as opposed to when you talk and state how you think things work. The distinction here is important, so I'll repeat that. When you listen, you learn how things work, as opposed to when you talk and you state how you think things work. Listening is constant. Salespeople actually know you learn most on the sales call before and after the formal meeting, and often the most important part of communication is to hear what isn't said. But you again. Guys, if you're not hooked up yet, the same advice applies to dating. Communication 6B on talking and listening. If you must talk, ask questions. People learn more from your questions than your answers. It makes them think and explore the choices with you. But there's a grand exception to all of this in business. Communication rule 6C. If you actually know the answer in a business situation, stop listening by all means and talk. State the answer and don't ask more questions. But if you go this route, back up your answer and your position with data. You don't win arguments by saying, I think. You win by saying, let me show you. If you can show them, show them. And finally, to round out communication rule number 9. You're writing all these down. You're going to get tired. Strive to respond to email instantly. A Google engineer derisively said to me, why, Jonathan, you're nothing but an expensive router. In many ways, he's right. But as a leader, if you don't respond to email quickly, everything stalls. If you don't think every time you get information, who needs to know this? You're not doing your job. Send me an email anytime. My email address is jonathan@google.com. You will get a reply sooner than you think. If, in fact, I am just an expensive router, I'm going to be a good one. Company culture 16 rules. Avoid hippos. Who knows what a hippo is? It's the highest paid person's opinion. Don't look to the hippos in the room. People shouldn't use titles to get what they want. If their experience is actually of value, they should be able to use their experience to frame a winning argument. Everybody at every level should have an equal voice towards the outcome based on the strength of their arguments. Who's my favorite hippo? Jim Barksdale. Jim Barksdale was the CEO of Netscape. He says, if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. I like to think that what he meant was let's get data, but I know Jim. I think that what he meant is let's go with mine. Culture rule number 2. You shouldn't be able to figure out the pecking order or org chart by looking at a product. This is my favorite Eric Schmidt narrative. He went to the docks at Sun and he pulled one of their servers off of the docks. He opens it up, 8 read-me first documents. Well, there's an entire MBA thesis in this case study. 8 different read-me first documents. What is this? 8 different hippos. Each of them thought he had the most important opinion. And the poor product manager at the bottom of the totem pole, he just threw them all in. Not the right decision for the end user, but easier than taking on a bloat of hippos. And bloat is, in fact, the correct noun for a group of hippos. And it's onomatopoetic in describing a company. Bloat. Very bad. Run away from companies like that. A good basic rule, you shouldn't be able to deduce a company's org chart by looking at their product. You can't see the Apple org chart when you look at the iPod, or the Amazon chart when you look at the Kindle. Culture rule number 3. Healthy organizations crush bureaucracy in all forms, dying organizations foment it. The most important attribute in an organization is its ability to get out of the way. That's why we don't have general managers at Google. Because a general manager's job is to put his business interests in his division ahead of those of the company. Culture number 4. When you're trying to accomplish something, ask for a winning strategy and the tactics needed to win. On their own, strategy and tactics don't produce winners. You need both. And there are people who are great at strategy and there are people who are great at tactics. That's why we have teams. Culture rule number 5. People are more productive if they are crowded. I learned this in the dot-com boom with At Home. We got a second building because we knew we were going to grow. And instead of letting people take over that building before we had enough people to fill it, we made it a soccer field. And later, it was customer support. Putting smart people together in close quarters is a combustible situation. Offices should be designed for energy and for interactions and not for isolation and status. A serendipitous byproduct of all of this is that social groups moderate the bad behavior of individuals. People hate to be judged poorly by their peers, and proximity builds in social controls. At least it does after college. I don't know what happens in college. Culture 6, empower the smallest of teams. A small team can often do more than a big one. At Google, we've learned that the size of a small team is about the size of a small family. In software development, the worst thing you can do is put more people on the project. Read the Mythical Man Month. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Well, think about that. Sam Adams, Mahatma Gandhi, Charles Lindbergh, Jackie Robinson, Rosa Parks, Mary Curie. Small teams of even one are the kind that make a difference. There was a recent study in the UK. They found that people working on a small team can tolerate twice as much pain as those who work alone. There was this chap by the name of Bert Troutman, professional soccer player in the 1950s, and he broke his neck in a World Cup match. He kept playing, and he made some crucial saves to win the game. Why? He didn't want to let his 10 closest pals down. What did I just do? I demonstrated communication rule number 5, a narrative. Culture number 7, working from home is a malignant, metastasizing cancer. Ban it. Some of you will want to argue this point with me. I'll be here afterwards. Culture rule number 8, engineers and product managers add complexity, marketing adds management layers, sales adds coordinators manage this. This is a statement that offends a lot of people. Don't be offended. Stop and think about it. It's an offensive line that offends a lot of parties equally, but is a broadly prejudicial generalization. If you think about it, it's true, and it must be managed. Culture rule number 9, knights are knights and knaves are knaves. You remember the childhood riddle about knights and knaves? You get to a fork in the road, and you need to know where to go, and so you can say, if I were to ask you which way to go, and if it's a knight, he'll tell you the truth, and it's a knave, he'll lie, so he'll still tell you the truth, and you figure out how to get there. That's like life. That's the workplace. There's knights and there's knaves. But in the real world, the knights always tell the truth, and the knaves sometimes lie. Maybe not all the time. But once someone reveals himself to be a liar, he is a liar. Once a liar, always a liar. And to give a bit of credit to the management literature, which I generally abhor, Tom Peters said, correctly, there is no such thing as a minor lapse of integrity. Culture rule number 11, dovere no provere, Russian proverb meaning, where were they in the 80s? Trust but verify, right? It's not just a phrase Reagan liked to say to Gorbachev, though he apparently did it a few times. Organizations will elide important details. So you must verify every assertion made. This is Andy Grove's principle, the former chairman and CEO of Intel. Why is it important? Because the primary job of a leader is judgment and communication. But judgment and communication are only as good as the data or truth on which it's based. Anyone who know who said that? I did. Culture rule number 12, focus on value rather than costs. In business, more revenue generally solves all problems. It's very simple. Spend 80% of your time on 80% of your revenue. It seems obvious. It is obvious. But it's actually hard to do because that other 20% of your revenue will end up taking on an inordinate amount of your time. Culture rule number 13, never suggest copying a competitor. Their products generally suck, and you should be able to do better. Culture rule number 14, hope is not a plan. Sadly, President Obama is learning that right now, and I'm a Democrat who proudly voted for him. Culture rule number 15, success breeds the green-eyed monster. Remember your Shakespeare, right? Iago speaking to Othello. Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds on. Where there is success, there is envy. And jealousy is a green-eyed monster that you cannot slay. But you can take away the monster's greatest weapon, which is surprise, and you can fight it with envy's kryptonite, which is humility. Culture rule number 16, do all reorganizations in a day. 24 hours. This is my corollary to the Ben Franklin wisdom that 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Hiring and development, 14 rules. Number 1, know how to interview well. Hiring is the heart and soul of the company. Great people make a great company, which in turn attracts more great people. You guys think it's the gourmet lunches, the massages, the espresso drinks, the gyms, and all of that stuff that bring people to Google. The main reason people want to come to Google is to work with great people. The same is true for schools. It's why the admissions department is so important. You want great students because they bring great teachers. You want great teachers because they bring great students. You want great students with great teachers so they're successful in business and donate money so that the president can go get more great teachers and get more great students, right? It's pretty simple. Hiring and development number 3. Managers don't hire people. Hiring committees hire people. Most companies have hiring managers who hire for a specific applicant to a specific job opening. We don't do that at Google. The gate is a committee. I initially hated these rules. But you learn a lot about a person if they resist that rule. And similarly, promotion should be a peer review process. We've copied a lot of wisdom from academia. You shouldn't lose it when you leave school and go to business. Hiring and development number 4. Instead of laying off the bottom 10%, don't hire them. It's way harder to fire people than it is to hire them. You want to remember that one, so I'll say it again. It's way harder to fire people than it is to hire them. Hiring and development number 5, don't hire specialists, especially in high tech. Corollary, don't grow up to be a specialist. Not only will the job change, the underlying pace of technological change will rewrite and transform the landscape so quickly that the specialist's job will be gone. Change is the only thing in tech that is permanent. Who said, I have no special talent, I am only passionately curious? Einstein. He understood this rule, and brings me to the next one, passion. Hiring and development rule number 6. You cannot teach passion. How can you expect people to be passionate at work if they're never passionate about anything, right? The guys who invented Google Sky are software engineers. They're not astronomists. They're astronomy enthusiasts. They didn't build a super cool product because they're great engineers. They did it because they love astronomy. Astronomy wasn't part of their job description. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. And when enthusiasm is real, it's palpable. If you can't taste it in the room, it's not there. Jonathan Rosenberg again. By the way, if you haven't tried Sky or Android on your phone, it's very cool. Hiring and development rule number 7. Urgency of the role isn't sufficiently important to compromise quality in hiring. What happens when I see a resume from my team and it says, we need this person because we're shorthanded? I ignore it. Hiring and development rule number 8. Identify and purge the bad eggs. Let me tell you my bad egg theorem. You go to a party. There's 6 pieces of sushi left. Your friend goes ahead of you. He takes 5 pieces of sushi. Bad egg. You see someone in the dining hall. They spill something. They give it sort of a perfunctory wipe. Bad egg. Get rid of bad eggs. Rule 10. Diversity is your best defense against myopia. Work with people of all backgrounds. Why? Because people with different backgrounds see the world a little differently. That's invaluable. You can't teach that kind of insight. Women, Jews, Muslims, blacks, Asians, South Americans, gays, straights, people in wheelchairs, people who can't see or hear. We hire them not to check off a box against the census and the politically correct label. You hire them because diversity is good for your company and your shareholders. That's also why we have 50 different engineering offices all over the world, because there's great talent everywhere. Don't just say that. Learn to actually believe it. Hiring and Development Rule 11. You can't punt the management training program. The list I'm giving you today, I didn't get it from a book. It's the notes I've been keeping on management to give to people who work for me over the years. Hiring and Development Rule number 12. Life is not fair. Disproportionately reward risk takers and performance. Alex Rodriguez, you guys know who he is, right? He makes $33 million a year. The average Major League Baseball player makes $3 million a year. I wanted to play Major League Baseball. I wasn't good enough. I'd pay $3 million just to walk out to center field in a Giants uniform at AT&T Park. It's not going to happen. Because life is not fair. As managers, you shouldn't tell people they're doing a great job when they didn't or strive to make the world fair. You're not coaching Little League. Remember, in Little League, parents are told, give 5 pieces of positive feedback for every negative one. Everyone gets a trophy, even the kid who picks daisies in right field and doesn't come to half the practices. I agree with the Founding Fathers. All men and women are created equal in the sense that we're endowed with certain unalienable rights. That said, we are decidedly not all equally good at what we do. And real life is a meritocracy. Some perform better than others. So if you want better performance from the best, celebrate and reward what you want to see more of. Hiring and Development Rule number 13. If you're going to pay Alex Rodriguez $33 million a year, keep feeding him the ball. Build around the people who have the most impact. And purge the bad eggs. The way to get rid of the bad eggs, to keep the people who have the most impact the happiest, is penguin pecking. You get all the people who don't like somebody to start pecking. And they go like this. Go on, go like this. You see, you don't really like it. Eventually you'll go, right? See? Yeah, it works. Decision-making, 6 rules. The role of a manager at most companies is to get his team to agree. Or if that's taking too long, you make the decision for them. That's not how we do things at Google. Decision-making number 1. Decision-making is about consensus, not unanimity. So as a group, let's do an exercise and come to an agreement on the definition of consensus. Well, you'll do that touchy-feely off-site when you get older. I have the mic. I'll just tell you what consensus is. Teams are not juries locked in a room until they reach a unanimous verdict. Don't spend hours in endless meetings striving for unanimity. Consensus is not unanimity. Guide the team to declare when good enough is better. Else, as Voltaire said, the perfect is the enemy of the good, from which there is no progress. Decision-making number 2. There's no consensus without dissent. To get there, you need to understand people won't truly buy in until all the choices are openly debated. If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. George Patton. If 2 people always agree, isn't one of them redundant? Decision-making rule 3. If there's doubt about what to do, consider your customer's perspective. That's what we do at Google. Decision-making 4. Choose your goals wisely. Goaling drives behavior and conflict. Make sure you have the goals right. And if the goals are creating conflict, change them. Decision-making 5. None of us is as smart as all of us. If I were on a board and everything got to the point where it all depended on one man or woman as the CEO, I'd fire him for getting us to that point. Remember that when you're a hippo in a meeting one day. Decision-making 6. Where there is harmony, there is no innovation. Consider Jewish yeshiva students for a moment. They're in an institution for studying the traditional Jewish texts. They're not there to memorize the texts. They're there to discuss and argue about them. So even though they're reading texts that are thousands of years old, they argue about the meaning of the texts. And in doing so, they uncover new ideas. They reach new consensus based on the same words the Jewish people have been reading for centuries. Innovation comes from disagreement, not from harmony. Fostering innovation, 5 rules. So how do we foster this innovation? Most companies manage creativity in order to manage risk. That, just doesn't work. Do you have any artists here today? Oh, good. I like you. Go do your art from 10 to 12 and be very creative. 12 to 4 is a management meeting. It doesn't work. Innovation comes from creativity. Creativity cannot be managed. It can be allocated, it can be budgeted, it can be measured, it can be tracked and encouraged, but it can't be dictated. Innovation rule 2, create a culture of yes based on optimism and big thinking. Organizations develop antibodies to change. That's why big companies stop innovating. If you're the innovator, you're like a virus. The antibodies want to kill you. Many people think it's their function to do nothing but say, "Thou shalt not." Leaders protect people from antibodies. Your focus should be "thou shalt." Create a spirit of optimism. Pessimists don't change the world. Innovation rule 3. Never stop someone from moving forward with their good idea because you have a better one. There's a bull market for innovation and a Darwinian process for weeding out the bad ideas. You will do best by simply encouraging all of them. The best will win and the others will fail. Thomas Edison said, to have a great idea, have a lot of them. Innovation rule 4. A leader's job is not to prevent risk, but to build the capability to recover when failures occur. There is no such thing as a good failure and a bad failure. Or there is such a thing as a good failure and a bad failure. A good one happens quickly, and it provides plenty of lessons. Sometimes you have to look at these lessons in the data. A bad failure takes a long time, and you don't learn anything. Leaders don't prevent failures. They prevent bad failures. Innovation 5. A good crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Whenever the public endures a crisis, ordinary citizens start to wonder how and whether our institutions really work. We no longer take things for granted. It is only then real change becomes possible. Bob Schiller, the economist. Many management challenges are in fact teaching moments. The crisis is the built-in narrative, so use it. Humility, 10 rules. Humility 1. Learn something new so that you can remember how hard it is to learn. You guys are all in college, so you're learning all the time. Maybe it's a message for your professors. Corollary, teach something so you can learn it. For example, in preparing my talk, I had to go through and review my notes and all of my management rules to codify them for you. Humility rule number 2, never stop learning. School is never out. There are always more classes you can take. Learn to program a computer, build a website, study architecture. Humility 3. Humility is correlated with age. Arrogance is inversely correlated with age. Why? Because as you get older, you realize how hard it is to get things done. This means that you are arrogant and I am humble. For every rule, there is an exception. I'm so humble, I'll let you decide in this case if it's you or me. Humility rule 4. You get personal leverage through empowerment, delegation, and inspection. Why? Because as a smart leader, you surrounded yourself with great people. Your people understand what they're doing better than you do. Humility rule 5. Judgment comes from experience, and experience comes with errors. Don't be ashamed or defensive about your errors. They are what make you smarter. You learn more from your mistakes than from your successes if you take the time to study them. Good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. Will Rogers. On my team, I've asked everyone who screws up a launch to write a postmortem and publish it to the entire team. You would think it would be a shameful experience. We keep an archive of all of these things on our site. Show me a team that never makes a mistake, and I'll show you a team that has never done anything innovative. Humility rule 6. Smart people can smell hypocrisy. So think before you act or speak. You have to commit to your team's goal and vision. They can tell when you don't really mean it. Make sure you spend your time on the things you tell your team are important, because they're watching. Why does this matter? Because culture is set from the top. And once set, it cannot be changed. Setting an example is not the main means of influencing others. It is the only means. Einstein again. Humility 7. Don't burn bridges. Many of the people you'll work with, you'll run into again. Our industry and the connected online world are not that big anymore. Observe people when they leave. You learn a great deal about a person and your ability to judge them in the moment they resign and in the manner they walk out the door. Humility rule 8. Would you work for yourself? If you would not work for yourself, why do your people? Humility 9. Write a self-review and be critical of yourself. Do this every year. It's the only way to learn. I'll start mine with, would I work for myself? This is hard to do. Humility 10. Communicate, confess, comply when you make a mistake. No one is perfect, not even you. My final observation is that in addition to knowing all of these rules to lead, you need to develop your own style. If you took any history here at CMC, you'll see examples of different styles. I took a course in the history of the Americas here. I learned about Hernan Cortez. He was a Spanish conquistador in 1519. He sailed from Cuba. He had 11 ships and 500 men, and his plan was to conquer Mexico, right? The superiors back in Spain sent word to Cortez to cancel the expedition. So what did he do? He ignored their order. Then he arrives on the Yucatan Peninsula, claims it for Spain, and starts encountering strong resistance from the natives as he heads inland. Like Major Bummer, the natives were not all so keen on being conquered. Some of Cortez's men questioned his judgment, didn't want to proceed. So what did he do? He scuttled his own ships. His management mantra basically became, conquer Mexico, you poor bastards, or die trying. The third option, flee back to Cuba, was eliminated. So what happened? He and his men conquered Mexico. I liked him. I learned that history lesson and decided that Cortez had a pretty cool style. So I tried adopting it myself. But it turns out that the software engineers in Silicon Valley, they don't really react well to having their ships being burned. They're pretty smart. They build new ships. They figure out how to strand the captain. Fortunately, I then took a family trip to Israel. Through some friends, we got to meet some Israeli tank commanders. I learned something very important from them. Israeli tank commanders don't yell charge. They yell acharai, which translates from Hebrew as follow me. Cortez burned the ships, so his men had no choice. Then he sat back and yelled charge as he sent the poor guys into bloody battle. I've learned that a better style is to emulate the Israeli tank commander. With that, I hope you enjoyed my rules. I do try to live by them. And in the words of every Israeli tank commander, acharai. Thank you.